In Python, variables are really names that point to a value. Think of them as labels that you stick on a value, and they can hold text, numbers, booleans, so on and so forth. And the language is also dynamically typed, meaning that when you create the variables, you do not need to indicate what type of variable that is. Unlike languages like Java, where you have to specify this is an integer variable or this is a string variable, you do not need to do the same in Python. So let's try to create a few variables for us here. So if I have a variable called city, and I can have another variable called population, which holds a number. I could have another variable called area, which holds another type of number or a decimal number or a floating point number. I could also have an Boolean value where we can say, is this a riverfront city? Yes, it is, and so on and so forth. If I run and execute the cell, really nothing comes out of that one, but let's actually try to print out the type of each of those variables. So we can have them as separate print lines here. And if I execute that cell, you see that the first one is of class string, the second is an integer, the third is a float, and finally the last is a Boolean. So you can see how we're able to assign or create variables that basically give each of those values a name so that we're able to reference them later on. We can also use those variables in other variables. So let me go ahead and try to create a new cell here, and I'll create a new variable and let's call it the population density, which basically is the population divided by the area. If I go ahead and execute this right here, we see there is the updated value for what the population density is. Now, one thing to note here, if I go over here and update this area value to, let's say, 200, and then I'm going to save the notebook and I'm going to go back to that previous cell, execute it again, you see that the number actually has not changed, which doesn't make sense. We have updated the area. If the denominator here is different or is bigger, the number of the population density should be lower. And what I need you to note here is the way Jupyter Notebook works is that if I did not execute this cell here still sees the old value of what the area used to be, which in that case was 143 something. So what you need to do, or what you need to make sure that you do, is that you execute any cell before you try to execute the following cells. So if I execute it again here, you'll see that the number has changed. Now in this cell here, I used one of the arithmetic operators, and that is the topic of the next video. So we'll see you there.